Hi, my name is Nancy Odimego. Welcome to Budget Podcast. Good to have you. Today we'll be discussing SOEs, the fiscal transparency, how far we have come and where we can be. And joining me is a senior research and policy analyst at Budget, Viola Kwaga, and Akinyemi Ogunsoya. Akinyemi is a research analyst at a social research consultancy based here in Lagos. Hi, Akin. Hi, Viola.
Hi, Nancy.
So good to have
Hello,
you guys
Nancy.
join us. Yeah, hello to you too. Let me just put it out here that this is not the first time SOEs is being discussed on this particular platform.
Yes.
Before we get right into it, let me just have Viola just give us a recap on the purpose of fiscal transparency, as part of broader open government reforms. Viola, just help us with a brief recap.
Okay, thanks, Nancy, and welcome, Akin. So fiscal transparency is an approach towards government and governance more broadly that takes as a core tenet of that government that openness, that transparency in information, in decision making, and in projections is a necessary part of good government. Now, this is not a trivial matter because governments exist, or governments as we know them, democratic governments as we know them, exist as a form of social management. Human beings decided that they needed a state to manage resources, to provide security, to ensure that businesses can transact, predictably and reliably. So the state implicitly owes citizens the highest standards of transparency. Quite recently, governments around the world, on the platform of the Open Government Partnership, decided to put fiscal transparency and accountability at the very forefront of their governance practices. And Nigeria signed up to that understanding, and today has an Open Government Partnership Secretariat within the country that is geared towards mainstreaming open government, which is fiscal transparency, i.e., the transparency in budgeting, the transparency in revenue, the transparency in expenditure, transparency in what is projected to be earned and what is projected to be spent as a means to improve the quality of government. I will also add a definition from Stanich that I think is very apt for fiscal transparency. He says that fiscal transparency implies an openness toward the public at large about government structure and functions, fiscal policy intentions, public sector accounts, and projections. It involves ready access to reliable, comprehensive, timely, understandable, and internationally comparable information on government activities, whether undertaken inside or outside the government sector. This is so that the electorate and financial markets can accurately assess the government's financial position and the true costs and benefits of government activities, including their present and future economic and social implications.
All right, thank you so much, Viola. So this openness or transparency, or let's just put it as it is, publishing of information. Now, how does it benefit citizens and the wider community? Speaking about the international partners here and the private sector. So what would you say are the consequences of opacity in this regard? So let's have Akin on this one.
So with a more open government and more open reporting from state-owned enterprises, there is more accountability, of course, because people know how much the organization or the SOEs are making and how they're spending it. And there's also more reason for those organizations or those entities not to be used as a form of corrupt conduits throughout the economy. So a great example of that would be NNPC, for example, which is like the symbol of corruption in Nigeria, where we know that there are a lot of monies that slush through it during the election periods and all of that. Then another example could also be the Saudi Aramco, which the Saudi royal family it's quite notorious as being a place where it has a lot of shady accounting, and the royal family uses it as a fiefdom to benefit certain people in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and all of that. And of course, it's not run as efficiently as it should be run. So I'd say that these are some of the benefits of opening up and reporting publicly the information about the operations of state-owned enterprises.
Okay, thank you. So let's talk about accountability now. How does the accountability of officials involved in SOE budgeting benefit citizens and the wider community as well, when you want to relate it to the consequences of lack of accountability? So let's have your opinion.
Yes, thank you. Let me just jump in. Akin mentioned something that I would refer to a little later. He mentioned something about efficiency. I will start by saying that while transparency is the watchword, transparency for accounting, transparency in procurement, transparency in contracting, it does not always lead to situations of accountability. Yes, they are two sides of the same coin, but you might be transparent in how you put out information. But when it is discovered that Vahala Kwaga has carried out a shady deal with Mr. Akinyemi Ogunsanya, and Vahala Kwaga is not called to account, there are allegations raised, but Vahala Kwaga is not made to answer before any panel. Vahala Kwaga is basically given a slap on the wrist and still given money again. That is when accountability does not happen, despite the fact that citizens were informed that Vahala Kwaga was involved in some financial impropriety, and he was involved in some shady dealing. The information was there. It was made public, i.e. it was done transparently, but there was no accountability. So this opens up the discussion to how the lack of accountability, despite the existence of transparency, does not create good government. And let me give an example. So the Niger Delta Development Corporation is a state-owned enterprise. It's owned by the government, but it's managed on behalf of the citizens of the Niger Delta region. There have been several allegations, from the COVID-19 malfeasance involving basically distribution of monies to everyone in the NDDC, from the MD to the drivers, to the current lack of repatriation of funds by the NDDC to the federal government. There's a percentage, I beg your pardon, there's a percentage that should be made public that is being collected by the NDDC from oil companies. And that is not being, the allegations were raised that this money is not being repatriated, but till we speak, there has been no prosecution, there has been no arrest, no one has been made to answer any question.
Answer for this, yes.
Yes, and this is an example of a lack of accountability. So you see that we know that there is a percentage that the NDDC is meant to make public. There's a percentage that they can collect. But as for the accountability of them being answerable on how they spent it, no one has been arrested, no one has been prosecuted. So I will say that a lack of accountability in budgeting, for example, will mean that when budgets are put out, there is no one we can hold, responsible for improper calculations, for poor accounting, for a misallocation of funds to aspects of the business that may seem frivolous. There will be no one we can hold accountable for duplication of items in a budget. There is no one we can hold accountable for an improper formulation of the budget of that state-owned enterprises and of that state-owned enterprise. And when these officials, see that they have, it's like a free-for-all in terms of their budgeting, it will mean that the MDs and the leadership of other state-owned enterprises will simply do the same thing, because there is no consequence for this, in quotes, bad behavior. And when the international community and the private sector sees that the government is extremely lax in prosecution, in investigation, it will see that it will create a business environment that is, one, very uncertain, that is, two, very arbitrary. And this is even a very serious point, because as it is, state-owned enterprises already enjoy a heightened access to credit. They already enjoy patronage, access to political favors. They already enjoy several waivers that the private sector simply does not have. This creates an environment that is non-competitive, and competition is the heart of business activity. It's the heart of a good economy. And when this doesn't happen, it has very, very serious spillover effects that would discourage the private sector from really investing. Akin, you can jump in now. Thanks.
So I think we should also look at it from an institutional perspective. These organizations don't live in isolation. They stay in polities where either the rule of law is upheld, or a situation where it is the rule of whoever is in power. So yes, I would agree that simply opening up your books to the public, for example, you could use the situation of the NNPC where they started publishing the annual reports when Muhammadu Buhari came in. But we also live in the Nigerian polity is one in which there isn't a lot of accountability. Generally speaking, institutions are weak, and there isn't a lot of political will to ensure that even some of the most critical state-owned enterprises are made to work efficiently and properly. So I think it's both an institutional thing, and there's also the angle of political will, because you can also even be in a weak institutional setting, but then the government wants maybe a certain health agency to deliver and to work very well, and then there's a lot of political capital spent to ensure that organization delivers on its objectives. So I think those two things work hand in glove. They work hand in hand in that sense.
Thank you so much, Aki. Now let's have a look at how citizens can be involved in promoting fiscal transparency in these state-owned enterprises, and what can they do with this information if it gets to them, or when it gets to them. Vayala.
Yes, thank you so much for that question, Nancy. The issue really is, how can citizens be made more involved in something that, to some of them might seem difficult,
strange,
might seem technical,
or new.
Exactly. You're dealing with budgets, you're dealing with accounting, you're dealing with financial information, you're dealing with fiscal projections, you're dealing with expenditure frameworks, you're dealing with fiscal responsibility. And it may be very daunting, because the average citizen may simply not have that level of attention when they're worrying about managing their lives. I think this is a place where civil society organizations, where citizens' representative groups can really step in to hold the SOEs accountable in the form of engaging with them, in real time. Now, this could be setting up stakeholder engagement sessions. This could be through writing letters. This could be through interviews of these, the leadership of these state-owned enterprises, to let them see that we are all watching, we are all expectant, we are all interested in how these things are managed, because we realize that the nature of interest state-owned enterprises have in the economy of a country is extremely important. If you look at the state-owned enterprises in Nigeria, for example, you will see that they cut across a wide range of core sectors, primary, secondary sectors, from energy to natural resources, to telecommunications, to banking, to agriculture, to infrastructure, the rail lines. So citizens need to know that, yes, they may not have that attention span, so to speak, to really be involved, but engaging with these people through the media, through social media, especially through existing platforms that they can use as representatives of their interest, can be one way that they can start. You do not expect a random citizen to write a letter to the MD of an SOE, but the network power that CSOs and other non-governmental organizations have in calling these people to account, their convening power, so to speak, they can act as these representatives. Also, and this may be a little far-fetched, but perhaps Nigerians can begin to look into the work of the legislature. The legislature performs constitutionally empowered oversight functions. Now, the legislature is empowered to oversee, the activities of government. Through their elected representatives, citizens can call SOEs to account. Citizens can demand for greater transparency, but it would involve them going through a legislature that may not be very interested, one, or may be politically captured, two, to even be interested in finding out whether an SOE is adhering to international best practices on fiscal transparency. But I think there is, they say that there's no time like the present. And the sooner citizens get to understand the weight of state-owned enterprises in the economic growth and development of their country, the sooner I think they will come up with interesting ways to really hold them to account and to ensure that they are more transparent.
So I'm looking at some real life examples now of transparency and accountability in SOEs in Nigeria. Akin, would you say we have any?
In Nigeria currently, I think they're really few and far between. But I would give kudos to the current administration of Muhammadu Buhari for at least getting the ball rolling about the NNPC publishing annual reports.
Yeah.
But now the issue with this is that has it been codified by law, and what regulatory agencies are there to ensure that post the Buhari administration, the NNPC continues down this path and even divulges even more information about how it works, how its employment practices work. At least we know that the NNPC can be quite opaque about its hiring practices and all of that. So setting the ball in motion with regards to that, I think that would also be a good thing. Currently, Muhammadu Buhari administration has started that process, and I'd say that was a very good one on their part, because at least people could see what the corporation was doing and the deeds and the misdeeds that were going on within. So it's very, very difficult for me to think of any other SOE. Okay, maybe if you call the DMO, that's the Debt Management Office.
Yes.
So if you call it a state-owned enterprise, I don't know if you call it that. I'd say the reforms done during the Obasanjo administration to ensure that the DMO became much more credible and communicated with the public even much more. I think that was also a very good step forward for the Nigerian government, and in terms of ensuring more accountability and more interaction with state-owned enterprises.
Thank you so much, Akin. Vayala, I don't know if you have some real-life examples you'd like to cite.
I think there is a lot that can be done. I think so far, apart from the NNPC, I would say the NLNG in their own reporting, and I guess you can't even really call it an annual report because they didn't even call it an annual report. They called it facts and figures, But if you look at what NEITI, that's the Nigerian Extractives Transparency Initiative, has done in the extractive sector to really serve as a platform to encourage and mainstream open government practices and principles, you could argue that the NLNG has been doing pretty well in terms of putting out its information in the public. Though I think its most recent report is 2019, and we all know the politics surrounding the extractive sector. But I think by and large, the NLNG does put out information on, the requisite information that an annual report should contain in this Facts and Figures 2019. However, what is missing definitely is going to be the budgeting, which is the key issue. What is missing are those fiscal projections. What is missing are the assets and liabilities and how those are managed, on behalf of the public. If I were to just take a bit of time to read out some of the principles of fiscal transparency, you would see that, you cannot find this in the average SOE in Nigeria. So, for example, one of them on fiscal reporting is that fiscal reports should provide a comprehensive, relevant, timely, and reliable overview of the government's financial position and performance. So if you look at those three metrics, reliable, comprehensive, timely, how many times do we get fiscal reports from state-owned enterprises like the NNPC, like the NLNG, like DICON, the Defense Industries Corporation in Kaduna that's meant to manufacture weapons? How often do you get reliable information from firms like the Nigerian Railway Corporation? How often do you get reliable, timely, and accurate information from the Bank of Agriculture, from Galaxy Backbone, from Nigeria Bulk Electricity Trading PLC, from Nigerian Deposit Insurance Corporation, and so on and so forth? How often do you see information that is usable, that is timely, that is accurate, that shows the government's position? Taking a look at fiscal forecasting, for example, and budgeting. Another principle is that budgets and their underlying fiscal forecasts should provide a clear statement of the government's budgetary objectives and policy intentions and comprehensive, timely, and credible projections of the evolution of the public's finances. So where can you find, documents put out in the public by state-owned enterprises that have these characteristics? The answer is next to zero. So the issue really, just like Akin mentioned earlier, quite insightfully, that there is a lack of political will. Oftentimes, these principles are there. The Fiscal Responsibility Act does spell out in very clear terms the expectations of the federal government for state-owned enterprises. But the people upon whose desks the buck should stop are simply unable to put their feet down and insist that these state-owned enterprises are governed according to public sector, public corporation principles. And that's really where a lot of the problems stem from.
All right, so regarding the problems now, in what way can the government then improve the fiscal transparency of SOEs in Nigeria? Akin?
So personally, I'd say one of the ways they could do so is passing a very strong and robust whistleblower policy. I think that would likely give an incentive to people within the organization, within the SOEs, blowing the whistle on illegal and downright fraudulent behavior being perpetrated in these organizations. Then I would also say that enforcement of the laws already on the book.
Okay.
Enforcement and ensuring that these reports aren't just a lot of words without a lot of substance. They should be chock full with substance, and also basically giving them breakdowns of the liabilities, the assets, the off-balance sheets liabilities that these organizations are taking on, the risks going forward, and all other things that will be of material interest to the ultimate shareholder of these organizations, which are or who are the taxpayers. So I'd say those are the things that the government could do, just starting, like say today or tomorrow, to improve the situation of reporting and accountability in state-owned enterprises.
All right, so Viola.
I think I totally agree. I think that whistleblower policy, transforming it into legislation would really create better conditions for people to stand up and actually report, because the idea surrounding a whistleblower policy, or the idea that whistleblowers can add value to justice and to security, is that the law or the state cannot be everywhere at the same time. So it needs to leverage on the interests of people, whether they be positively inclined or motivated, or negatively motivated, to provide relevant information on whether fraudulent activities or malfeasance is occurring inside companies, inside offices, etc. So I totally agree with that point, and I think it's high time that the whistleblower policy be transformed into legislation. However, I am skeptical as to the effect, because as we all know, or as is said colloquially, what Nigeria lacks is not laws, but their enforcement. So I like the point that Akin made as well regarding enforcement. And this boils down to the politics of Nigeria. This boils down to the existing notions, the norms, the values, the ideas that support concepts like accountability. Sometimes you'd hear Nigerians say there's no such thing as accountability in Nigeria. I mean, this is true in some sense, because when Nigerians hear of illegalities being done, arrests are hardly made when they involve high-profile persons. And this lends itself towards a very poor perception of the governance of the country. And where political office holders, where civil servants are caught, with their hands inside, I don't know, Nigerians eat cookies, yes, hands inside the cookie jar, and nothing is done. Their wrists are not even slapped, not to talk of them being, prosecuted and charged. This creates, an environment where impunity reigns, and it requires enormous amounts of political will, to put an end, or at least reduce these things to a minimal point where they have next to zero effect on the operation of the economy. So I think I'm just going to re-echo Akin's well put out points about turning some of these policies into legislation and the need for political will. I think politicians and the civil servants need to see that there is a gain for them when they ensure that the buck stops at their table. Their regime will earn political legitimacy. And this seems like an intangible thing, but it can rear itself in very tangible, real life impacts when there's a greater sense of nationhood, there's a greater sense of justice, there's a greater sense of commitment to the values of Nigeria, simply because the political office holders and those responsible are seen to be doing the right thing. There's a lot of individual and ministerial posterity that can come along with them actually being transparent and being accountable. And this really improves the quality of governance, which is one of the soft infrastructures that any nation needs to survive. The rule of law that Akin alluded to earlier is an example of soft infrastructure. It's intangible, but it depicts itself in very tangible ways in the form of an improved business environment.
Okay, just following from what Bayala said about increased sense of nationhood, we know that currently Nigeria has a very, there are a lot of secessionist movements and groups and everything. And if you dig deep into what is driving a lot of these secessionist movements and sentiment and everything, it's a feeling of injustice. So when people feel that, say, the NDDC, which was created to alleviate the suffering of people in the Niger Delta, and they hear of things about the corruption in the board of directors and the drivers and everything. So if people believe that these people are going to be brought to book, someone in Lokoja will not see the NDDC as a vehicle to just enrich political elites from the South, for example. Yeah. And so people will be much more willing to support the NDDC to actually and also lead to a form of legitimacy of the NDDC as an organization. For a situation where there isn't a lot of accountability, or there isn't even accountability at all for these people. It starts like people start going into the ethnic corners or into the tribal corners, and that itself doesn't help nationhood.
All right. So before I let you people go, let's talk about the value of SOEs in Nigeria, in terms of assets. I don't know. It's very tricky. I don't know. Do we have, let alone measuring it? So Viola.
Thank you, Nancy. I was also kind of chuckling when I heard that question because, it is probably next to impossible to answer it with any sense of accuracy. This is why I say so. For you to know the value of state-owned enterprises and their assets in a country, you'd have to have a reliable register of assets. And like I had mentioned earlier, there are state-owned enterprises in nearly every major sector. Well, I guess except the tertiary sector, but the primary and secondary, extractives, agriculture, and processing, the government is involved. So when you do not have an asset register, how will you know, for example, what is owned by Galaxy Backbone, which works in telecommunications? How will you know what is owned by the Nigerian Bulk Electricity Trading PLC or the Nigerian Electricity Liability Management Limited? How will you know the assets owned by the Nigerian Mining Corporation, which is an existing company that has not had its enabling law repealed? But in all my searches online, I have not seen any documents relating to the Nigerian Mining Corporation, which I found very, very suspect. So, companies like the Transmission Company of Nigeria, the Nigerian Railway Corporation, these are big players in energy. These are big players in infrastructure. But when we do not know how much they own, and this leads to them not having an asset registry, there is no way we can even say with any form of assurance how much, the SOEs are worth, and perhaps even how much they are contributing to the economy. This is even away from issues of budgeting. This is away from issues of their current liabilities or current assets, but their existing historical assets, as a matter of fact, are unknown. So I think this is a very, very, very serious issue that civil society and the government needs to take seriously going forward to ensure that Nigeria is made a much better destination for investment for international and even domestic finance.
All right, thank you. So Aki, let's have your take on it.
So just echoing what Bayala said, I think it's very difficult to know how many the assets they own, the assets, the liabilities they have, the net worth as organizations or as entities. It's very difficult because so even during this conversation, I'm just beginning to know some of these state-owned enterprises, especially the Nigerian Mining Corporation. I've never heard of them before. I've heard of Bulk Electricity Trading and the Transmission Corporation of Nigeria, but I'm not. So I've been to the website of the TCN, and I've never seen any major report about what they own and what their net worth is. So even an annual report, I don't think I've seen it. So I think it's very difficult to know the assets that they own. For some of them, maybe the NNPC. I keep on using the NNPC because it's like the crown jewel of the Nigerian state. I think the NNPC, you could say maybe you can estimate how much it makes in terms of revenue, but it's very, very difficult to know how much profit it makes. Very, very difficult to know even the revenues itself, like who exactly are the monies going to. It's very, very complicated and very, very opaque. Unfortunately, I don't have a very good answer for you.
I was not expecting a straight answer because I know.
I don't think any of us have none of us really have a serious answer.
For that, So, thank you so much for being a part of the conversation today. Thank you for sharing your thoughts with us. We had Viola Kwaga, the Senior Research and Policy Analyst at Budget, and Akinyemi Ogunsoya, a Research Analyst at a social research consultancy based in Lagos. Thank you so much, guys.
Thank you, Nancy. Thank you for having me. Thank you, Akim. It was great discussing with you. We look forward to doing this again.
Yeah, thank you, Nancy. Thank you, Viola. Thanks for having me. Yes.
It's our pleasure. Thank you. While the conversation continues, you can follow us on our social media platform. On Facebook, it's at BudgetNG. On Instagram, it's BudgetNG. And on Twitter, it's also BudgetNG. My name is Nancy. I hope to have you join us again.